Welcome to Just Read It. I'm Caroline Miller, your host for this Pacific Northwest talk show on books with local writers who give you their take on New York Times best-selling authors. And today we are going to be discussing a book called A Better Man by Louise Penny. It's a long series that most of you probably know. She's a mystery writer of some note. And my two guests today are local writers. Sydney Stevens, who is, I don't know, I'll let Sydney tell you, but I think of her as an historian. And Serena Zilliacus, who has been working on her first novel. So we're going to begin with you, Sydney. I know you've got a new book out. I wonder if you'd give us a little bit about background on that, what the title is and what it's about.
I'd love to. I might be able to show you. It's Historic Haunts of the Long Beach Peninsula. It's about ghosts that are here on the Long Beach Peninsula, but it's really a history book. That's my milieu, is history, specifically of Southwest Washington, of this little area where I live. And I discovered that ghosts are a wonderful vehicle to present and learn about history. So this is my second. It's a companion piece to ghost stories of the Long Beach Peninsula. Okay. And it's this Historic Haunts was just out in July, I think. So.
All right. Well, I read the first one, pretty spooky, so I want to warn you. Life is real. Serena, how are you doing on your new novel?
It's progressing nicely. Editing is really tough, isn't it, Sydney? Mm-hmm. I got too much information. I love to research history as well, so I've probably got too much history in there. So I've got to snip that out and keep it to the story. So my book's called Where Wild is Born, and it revolves around the life of a girl called Janny, born to a silent movie maker and his opera singer wife. And it's set between the two world wars of the last century and between the two allied countries of America and England. And it really revolves around the story of relationships that she makes and loses, of the old world at war and the new wild one of the West and Northeast USA. So,
okay. Well, I'm very anxious to read this because while it's based on facts, it has some of the excitement of a novel, which I'm sure you're going to weave the two together very, very well. Well, okay. Now we're going to talk about this master of prose, Louise Penny, and her. Sydney, I'm going to have you start giving us a little short overview of the book, because Serena, Sydney is a real fan of Louise Penny, so you and I are going to probably learn a lot today.
Yeah, cool.
So
no pressure.
No, come on, you're the historian. You've got to know everything. All right.
Well, I just, in doing my research, isn't research fun? That's the best part. In doing my research about this book, which came out in, I think,
couple of years ago.
5 years ago? Is that right?
A couple of years. We don't.
A couple of years ago. Okay. I looked on YouTube and I found a presentation that Louise Penny was making in her book debut of A Better Man. And one of the things that she asked the audience had a time to ask questions. And she said, please don't say anything specific about the book, because as you know, all of my books are intertwined. And anything specific will give away either the next one or the last one. So I'm going to hang my hat on that and say I won't say anything specific about A Better Man, but I will talk about Louise Penny's her series in general. They're based on the protagonist is Chief Inspector Armand Gamache, Chief Inspector of the Sûreté in Quebec, in Canada, and the cast of characters continues throughout the entire series. You meet most of them in the first book, and I have to say too, if you have not read A Better Man, you probably haven't read any of the books because they're compelling. Well, if you've read the first one and you are compelled to read the next one, and you will have read A Better Man. You've read them all probably. If you haven't read A Better Man, start at the beginning and with Still Life.
Mhm.
And then you will meet the characters as they're introduced, and you will learn about their relationships, their incredible characters and personalities, and you will find out all about where they live, which is in Three Pines in the Eastern Township, not far from Montreal. And
I'm going to stop.
I will tell you a little bit more about that later, because I went on a quest to go see Three Pines.
Okay, I'm going to stop it though, because it's very clear you're a loyal fan and you're not going to override what the author wants. But I'm going to ask Serena to give us just a snapshot of this particular plot, because this is kind of a turning point in the inspector's life. So can you just a nibble at the plot so people will know whether it's something they might be interested in?
Well, I have to say that I love detective stories, that gruesome though they may be, but I really love a well-turned tale revolving around, juicy murder. And I hadn't actually read any of her books, so this was the first one. So it's interesting. Sydney says, if you haven't read, any, go to the beginning, do that. So but having said that, it does stand alone on its own, this book. There is a mystery in the beginning about what event happened, that the inspector is now working for his son-in-law at the Sûreté, and that gets revealed a little by little, bit by bit, throughout the book, but not in its full form. So I'm assuming that event happened in the previous book, Sydney.
Yes, but even in the very first book, and this one is number 15, right?
Yeah, I know. So, it's amazing.
Yeah. So even in the very first book, the seeds, I mean, she's incredible about
she has a long vision
into the future. Yeah. And so that's one of the beauties of reading from the beginning. I urge you to do that.
No, I will. I'll be completely lost in all the books then. But what to get back to the actual weaving of this tale, there are many characters that come in and out of this, and Three Pines figures, as a character on its own, actually, within the novel. And I like the way that, okay, the two sort of main characters are male, but there are many female characters that are in this novel as well, including the inspector's wife, their daughter not so much, but she's there, and then female detectives and so forth figure very heavily. And of course, there are other female characters that I can't elaborate on that appear later on. But it's it's really, it's an intellectual challenge, because normally I can guess who done it from the beginning. My kids get really annoyed with me. I tell, in films and books and everything, I can guess who done it. But this one, I really couldn't. I really, really couldn't. And that's what keeps you reading, and it keeps you engaged with it. And hats off to the author. It's really.
Let me come in again. I can see you're not going to give away a thing. The two of you are absolutely wisely. So to the audience, there is a murder, but it begins with the disappearance of an elderly gentleman's daughter, and he approaches the village for help. In the meantime, there's a huge storm and flood, and dams are breaking. So this little isolated community is facing a huge crisis, and so Gamache is touched by this elderly man because he has a daughter, and he gets involved. And so this is the nub of, in my mind, touching on what the two of you say, the thing about Penny's characters is they have so much depth. They're not paper dolls. So there is a hook, an emotional hook that Gamache gets drawn into, that takes him into this. Now, ladies, have I told all? Have I ruined the plot?
No, and actually it's really good that you touched on the storm, I think, because that too is also a character, and it's also a very enormous character in our lives now. Climate change.
Mm-hmm.
This is something they've been waiting for 100 years, and it looms over them in the book, and time is of the essence, which presses you, makes the pace of the book, because before this massive event happens, they have to solve this crime. But of course, they all get thrown into it, and that's
all right. Well,
it's compelling.
Seem like you're chopping at the bit. Get in here and straighten us out with your insights.
I just want to say that, one of the beauties of Louise Penny's books, or her plots, almost everyone has a universal, very important central character, if you want to say that, whether it is 100-Year Storm, addiction, drug addiction in one of the books, graft in the government, in one of the books, or in that's a theme that goes throughout. Every single one of her books is topical, and very often, and I'd sure like to know her secret, very often she introduces me, anyway, to a topic that I've barely heard about. And I learn a lot about it through her characters and through her plot development. And then suddenly, as often is the case when you are finding out new information, I'm finding out everywhere. The New York Times, on internet, suddenly whatever it is, whether it's fentanyl or it doesn't matter. It's and she's there. She's always there, just a little bit ahead of.
Well, I wondered, when you went to hear her speak, did she say, where she gets certain streams in her novels from? Does she read an article?
Her process was really interesting, I thought. She said that, and I didn't go, this was a YouTube thing. I saw her on YouTube talking. I did go on a quest to Three Pines with a book group. And we that was a fabulous experience. I recommend it to anyone. We wrote to Louise Penny, and one of her assistants, I don't know, maybe her only assistant, I have no idea, sent us actually a list and maps of all the places in the eastern townships where she had been inspired. So you go to the Myrna's bookstore, a bookstore that inspired the bookstore in Three Pines, or a bistro that inspired and all in different places and never exactly what you read about. But when she was explaining her process, she said it takes her a year to write a book, and she writes a book. She publishes, her publisher has a book every year.
God, I wish
She
that was my
starts
case.
with a notebook, and she says, I just wander around with a notebook. She said they're in categories like characters or quotations or poetry, and she, as things occur to her, she sits them down, and she compared it to being a pointillist painter. And she said, I put something there and something there and something up there, and pretty soon those dots get filled in. But she said the magic for her is that when she's ready to, when it starts to coalesce and she's ready to sit down and write, there's still space between those dots for inspiration and for whatever is going to happen. I loved the way she explained it. It was wonderful.
Well, let me again pitch in, because technique is wonderful and these insights about the author, but I want to know, what about this book appealed to you? What was there, an aha moment in style, the compassion of the characters? All of her characters are flawed. I mean, they are so human, so third dimensional. Was it her description of presence? What defines Penny for you in this book in terms of the plot? What would you say to someone who said, "Oh, shall I read this book?" Go ahead, Serena. How would you answer, since this is your maiden voyage with?
I think it's because she doesn't shy away from all these threads of life. You know, we don't live a linear life. We live a life where you're going along one day and, you know, you get a phone call from your child or from a friend. There's a disaster, a parent's dying, a fire is threatening in Australia. You wonder whether your friends are caught up in it. So your mind, your life is, you know, constantly being bombarded by all these new bits of information and details and things that may change the course of your life. She doesn't shy away from that. So she has addiction, she has a storm, she has, you know, older characters who are pivotal, she has younger characters that are pivotal, she has LGBTQ characters, she's got,
Well, and you know, she exposes their guts. Let's just lay it out there. I mean,
but not in a I was going to use the word perverse, but not in a sort of salacious way. It's just, okay, this is someone who lives in the village and they do this, and this is someone who lives in the city and they do that, and they come in and out like people in your own life come in and out. And so she's not afraid of this tale taking her where it takes her. And which means that, you know, if it's going to be told in 200 pages, okay, it's told in 200 pages, 3, 4, whatever, but it keeps you going on this roller coaster until they find the protagonist.
I like
and it doesn't just end with finding who done it. It's, you know, there is this tale of the inspector and his wife's private life with their kids and what's going to happen to them that I can't say anything about, and Sydney knows why.
Sorry.
let me. I want to get to certain points here before the time lapses. So, Sydney, I want you to say what you think, but I want to. Maybe you could pick up on Serena's comment. It is the you're not in a linear movement. And I think that's, for me, what makes the book so interesting, that they are true to life. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I do think that. And I think that this book, like all of the books, may complete one thread, but it leaves many others open, and it picks up threads you thought were completed in a different book. And isn't that the way life is? I think you're right on, Serena, about that. This book, I think, centered, for me, the compelling thing about this book was that it really centered on Gamache's complicated and really deep feeling for his son-in-law, Jean-Guy, and their relationship, and Jean-Guy's own reciprocating feelings about Armand, and they're very complicated and have become increasingly complicated as the books have come along. But this book in particular deals with that in a very poignant yet very real way. And I think
let's talk about that real way, because she throws these two men who've been colleagues, intimate colleagues, and in fact, they have worked together for years. And now the son-in-law is leaving, and Gamache has been demoted for some reason, and is taking back the seat that his son-in-law is leaving. But there's one catch. The son-in-law hasn't left yet. So there is a juggling act between these two men as to who's in charge. Anybody want to speak to that tender moment?
Well, I think it's a really interesting plot device, if you like, because they're obviously very close. They obviously admire one another. I don't think Jean-Guy knows how much Armand admires him until the novel really gets going, because he's been his subordinate and he's his son-in-law. Let's face it, it's an incredibly entwined and difficult relationship. Just looking at it that way.
Yes.
And then for Jean-Guy to be his father-in-law's boss, who's been his mentor and his dad, from what I can
now,
remember.
And the son-in-law is the boss for.
Mm-hmm. And there's terrible emotions building up from the point of view that Jean-Guy is leaving. So,
Sydney, I'm going to let you wrap up here because we're moving along. Have you anything to add that will focuses on why we should buy the book?
Even if you didn't, I guess I would say to anyone who questioned whether they should buy the book or get it from the library or whatever, or read the book, Louise Penny is a pleasure to read, whether or not you care about these characters or read the other books. Every sentence is a pleasure. Every paragraph is a pleasure. She handles language beautifully, and she makes you think. And she makes you think, not only just think intellectually, but think about your own relationships and what's important to you and who's important to you and why, and the people that you really don't like so much and why, and what's good or bad about them. She does that to you. She speaks to my heart, and there aren't a lot of authors that do.
Well, she is someone that I could dislike very easily for all these multiple talents. I could be extremely jealous, but in the meantime, you can contemplate, audience, and read some of these books yourselves and give yourself a real treat. Well, I want to thank my two guests for this all too brief introduction to Louise Penny. Serena, give us again the name of this book that we want to see come.
It's called Where Wild is Born.
Where Wild is Born, and it's a wild book by the sound of it. And Sydney, your latest saga?
My
Again,
latest one is Historic Haunts of the Long Beach Peninsula.
I want to read it.
yes,
The ghost that lives in my house is in this book.
well, Serena, don't read it unless you've got a big dog with you.
My dog's a chicken.
Well, ladies, this has been a pleasure. I wish we had had more time. I hope you'll both come back and join us for another edition of Just Read It. And to my audience, please consider coming back and maybe subscribing, because we publish only every 2 months. You wouldn't want to miss these insightful discussions. But if not, or if, till next time, this is Caroline Miller, thanking you for joining the three of us for Just Read It.